Henry Caldwell wiped his hands on a rag and leaned back against the basement wall, his chest rising with the heavy sigh of a man both tired and proud. The old security panel in front of him hummed to life, the small green light flickering back on for the first time in weeks. At 65, his eyes weren't as sharp as they had once been, and his knees ached from crouching for so long, but he still had the steady hands of the electrician he had been all his life. "Eleanor," he whispered under his breath, glancing up at the framed photo of his late wife sitting on the workbench shelf. She smiled back at him from 20 years ago, cradling a pie fresh from the oven. "Guess I still know a thing or two." The house felt different when he spoke to her picture. Quieter but not lonely, at least not entirely. It was their home, built brick by brick, and though she had been gone 5 years now, Henry couldn't bring himself to leave it. Every creak in the floorboards, every bloom in the garden, still carried her touch. He tested the cameras one by one from his laptop. Front door clear. Driveway clear. Backyard clear. And the basement entry, the one that had been giving him so much trouble, finally came online. For the first time in a while, Henry felt safe again. Too many break-ins had been happening in the neighborhood lately, and while most folks shrugged it off, he knew how quickly small crimes could spiral. At that very moment, the doorbell rang upstairs. Henry wiped the sweat from his brow and trudged up the stairs, muttering to himself. Daniel and Clara stood at the front step. His son looked worn, hollow eyes, hair unkempt, his smile more an apology than a greeting. Clara, on the other hand, was immaculate. Perfect hair, pressed blouse, a soft perfume that clung to her like a mask. She flashed Henry a dazzling smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Dad," Daniel said, stepping forward to hug him, though his embrace felt hurried. "We thought we'd drop in for dinner like old times." Henry forced a smile and let them in. He wasn't blind to the tension between them. Daniel had been struggling with debts for years, gambling mostly, though he never admitted the details. Clara seemed supportive on the surface, but there was a sharpness about her, something he couldn't quite place. Over the meal, Clara dominated the conversation. "So Henry," she said lightly, swirling her wine glass, "this place is beautiful. You ever think about what it might be worth these days? Houses around here are going for a fortune." Henry raised an eyebrow. "It's not for sale." "Oh, of course," she replied quickly, with a laugh that sounded rehearsed. "Just curious. And with all the talk about neighborhood safety lately, I was wondering, do you still have that camera system? I remember Daniel saying it was broken." Henry felt the fork pause in his hand. He glanced at Daniel, who kept his eyes fixed on his plate. Something inside Henry's gut tightened, but he shrugged it off. "I got it working again," he said slowly. Clara's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, almost imperceptibly, before returning in full force. "Well, that's wonderful. Peace of mind, right?" Before Henry could respond, his phone buzzed. It was Mrs. Whitaker from down the street. Her husband had collapsed, and she needed help. Old habits kicked in. Henry was already reaching for his jacket. "Dinner was great," he said, moving toward the door. "I've got to go help the Whitakers. Lock up when you leave." Clara's eyes followed him, calculating, though she said nothing. Daniel looked torn, shifting in his seat. As Henry drove off into the night, the image of Clara's fleeting expression stayed with him. He couldn't shake it, though he told himself he was being paranoid. After all, family was family. But in the basement, the newly revived cameras blinked steadily, recording every shadow, every whisper, and every secret yet to come. The morning sun filtered weakly through the blinds as Henry poured himself a cup of coffee. His joints ached, the way they always did after late-night work, but the satisfaction of repairing the camera system made it easier to bear. He sat at the kitchen table, laptop open, intending only to test the feeds once more before starting his day. He clicked the screen. The front door camera popped up first, quiet, uneventful. The driveway looked just as it should. He switched to the basement feed, expecting nothing more than empty shadows and shelves lined with Eleanor's preserved jars. Instead, he froze. The timestamp read 11:42 p.m. the previous night, after he had left for the Whitakers. There on the grainy footage, Daniel and Clara slipped in through the back door. Daniel's head was low, his shoulders hunched. Clara, on the other hand, carried herself with the confidence of someone stepping into her own living room. Henry's stomach tightened. He raised the volume. The microphone had picked up their voices faintly, but enough. "Are you sure he doesn't suspect?" Clara whispered, glancing at the basement camera. She waved a hand dismissively. "Oh right, this thing's been dead for weeks." Daniel hesitated. "I don't know, Clara. He's sharp. Sharper than you think." Clara turned to him, her eyes glinting in the low light. "Daniel, listen to me. We don't have a choice. Your debts aren't going away. Leo doesn't wait forever. You owe him 50 grand, and if you think he's going to just forget about it, you're dreaming. The insurance money from your father is the only way out." Henry's blood ran cold. "Insurance money?" Clara continued, her tone icy. "The basement is perfect. One slip down the stairs, one accident, and it's all over. He's old, frail. No one will question it. Just like Harold Peterson last year, remember? Or Dorothy Mitchell 2 towns over. Accidents happen all the time." Henry gripped the edge of the table so hard his knuckles whitened. Clara Jennings, his daughter-in-law, wasn't just manipulative. She was a predator. A professional. Daniel shifted uncomfortably on the video. "He's my dad, Clara." "Your dad," she snapped, "is also our ticket to survival. Do you want Leo's men showing up at our door? Do you want to end up in a ditch somewhere? Because that's where this is headed if you don't grow a spine." Henry muted the sound, heart pounding. He didn't need to hear more. The betrayal was already carved into his chest like a wound. His son, his only child, was standing beside a woman plotting his death. He sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the frozen image of their silhouettes in his basement. Eleanor's voice echoed in his head, soft and steady. "Trust your instincts, Henry. They've kept you alive this long." His instincts screamed that Clara was dangerous, that Daniel was weak, and that time was running out. Henry leaned back, forcing himself to breathe evenly. Fear was there, yes, but so was something else. Anger. Not the hot, reckless kind, but the cold, sharp anger that came from betrayal. He would not be another name on Clara's list of accidents. He replayed the footage, saving it to an external drive. Then another. He copied the files again to a hidden cloud folder, double-checking each upload. If Clara thought she was clever, she hadn't met a man who had wired entire hospitals, who had spent decades ensuring power flowed even in storms. He knew redundancies better than anyone. As the last file finished uploading, Henry looked around the quiet kitchen. The house had never felt so strange, his sanctuary now a stage for a planned murder. He whispered again to Eleanor's picture on the wall. "Don't worry, love. They think they've set the trap, but they've walked straight into mine. Great. Let's keep building the tension." Here's Chapter 3. The pattern expanded to 600 words. Henry barely slept that night. The images from the basement camera looped endlessly in his mind. Daniel's slumped shoulders, Clara's icy eyes. Betrayal was one thing, but what chilled him to the bone was Clara's casual mention of names. Harold Peterson, Dorothy Mitchell. These weren't idle threats. These were markers of a pattern. At dawn, Henry brewed himself a strong pot of coffee and sat at the dining table with a notepad. His hands trembled slightly as he scribbled down the details he remembered. Clara had rattled off the names as if reciting grocery items, her tone matter of fact. Harold Peterson last year. Dorothy Mitchell 2 towns over. He underlined each name twice, his pen pressing deep grooves into the paper. Henry wasn't one to jump to conclusions, but the coldness in Clara's voice told him everything. She had done this before. Maybe not with her own hands every time, but she had orchestrated it. An accident here, a fall there. Quiet deaths that left families grieving and insurance companies paying. The thought made him shudder. How many times had she charmed her way into someone else's life, wearing that same polished smile she wore at his dinner table? How many families had been torn apart before his? He clicked through the footage again, replaying the moment Clara leaned close to Daniel. "Do you want Leo's men showing up at our door?" That name stuck with him. Leo. Whoever he wasn't just a lone shark. Clara had spoken of him with a mixture of fear and respect, which meant she wasn't the top of the ladder. There was someone above her, someone pulling strings. Henry leaned back in his chair and rubbed his temples. His son had been ensnared, drawn into debt and desperation, but Clara was the spider at the center of this web. The plan was clear enough. Sunday morning, an accident in the basement. Henry had 2 days, maybe less. He forced himself to think like an electrician again, like a problem solver. Identify the circuit, isolate the issue, reroute the current. This wasn't just about surviving. This was about exposing the truth. Henry opened his laptop and searched the local news archives. It didn't take long. Elderly man dies in fall ruled accidental. Harold Peterson, 78, passed away after a fall down the stairs of his home. Known for his charitable work, he is survived by. Henry's jaw tightened. Local woman found dead, tragic accident. Dorothy Mitchell, 82, was discovered at the bottom of her basement steps. The pattern wasn't just in Clara's words. It was written in black and white. Quiet obituaries, tidy explanations, grieving families left with no answers. Henry closed the laptop, his pulse quickening. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for them too. Harold, Dorothy, and whoever else had been erased by Clara's schemes. For a long while, he sat in silence, the ticking of the kitchen clock louder than usual. Then he stood, steadying himself. If Clara and Daniel thought of him as an easy mark, they had underestimated the wrong man. He checked the cameras again, every feed recording flawlessly. He installed a second set of backups on a drive hidden in the attic, then another in his tool shed. Redundancy was his ally. As evening fell, Henry stood at Eleanor's old rose garden, the autumn air cool against his face. He bent down to touch one of the blooms, whispering as though she stood beside him. "They think I'm frail," he said quietly. "They think I won't see it coming. But I've spent my whole life building systems, Eleanor. And I'm about to build one more, this time to trap them." Inside the house, the cameras blinked steadily, recording not just the present but the weight of history. Clara Jennings wasn't just a daughter-in-law anymore. She was a predator, a serial thief of lives. And Henry Caldwell had just marked her as his prey. Henry's hands trembled as he ejected the SD card from the security system. The morning sun cast long shadows across his workshop, but he felt no warmth. 24 hours had passed since he'd witnessed his son, his own flesh and blood, calmly discussing how to stage his murder. The weight of that knowledge sat like lead in his chest. He couldn't go to the police. Not yet. Clara had been smart, meticulous even. She'd mentioned police contacts, friends in the system who'd helped her before. Henry needed someone he could trust absolutely, someone whose loyalty couldn't be bought or intimidated. Rebecca Sullivan's office occupied the 3rd floor of a renovated brownstone downtown. Henry had met her 15 years ago when she'd handled Eleanor's estate planning. She was sharp, ethical, and most importantly, she'd never liked Clara. "Something off about that woman," she'd said after their first meeting. Henry wished he'd listened. The receptionist showed him in immediately. Rebecca's silver hair was pulled back in her characteristic bun. Reading glasses perched on her nose as she reviewed documents. When she looked up and saw Henry's face, she set everything aside. "Henry, what's wrong?" He placed the SD card on her desk like it was radioactive. "I need you to watch something. And I need you to tell me I'm not crazy." For the next hour, Rebecca sat in silence, her expression growing harder with each minute of footage. When Clara's voice detailed Harold Peterson's accident, Rebecca's jaw clenched. When Daniel discussed the basement stairs, she closed her eyes briefly, composing herself. "Henry," she said finally, her voice tight with controlled fury. "Do you understand what you've just shown me? This is evidence of premeditated murder. Multiple murders. This woman isn't just after your money. She's a serial killer." "I know." His voice cracked. "My son. Rebecca, Daniel is part of this. Your son is in over his head with a psychopath." Rebecca was already typing, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "But right now, we need to protect you and build an airtight case. Give me 24 hours. Rebecca worked with the precision of a surgeon. First, she verified Clara's identity through a private investigator she'd used for decades. Thomas Chun was worth every penny of his exorbitant fee. Within 6 hours, he'd confirmed that Clara Brooks, née Miller, was actually Clara Walsh, wanted in connection with suspicious deaths in 3 states. The photographs Chun uncovered showed the same woman wearing different names like costume changes. Clara Walsh, Clara Miller, Julie Winters. "She's been doing this for at least 8 years. Chun reported, spreading printouts across Rebecca's conference table. Always targets elderly men, always through a younger male accomplice, always stages accidents. Your client is victim number 7 that we can confirm. Could be more. Rebecca scheduled Henry for an immediate medical evaluation with Dr. Patricia Patel, a geriatric specialist with impeccable credentials. If this goes to trial, they'll try to paint you as confused, possibly suffering from dementia. We need documentation proving you're of sound mind. Dr. Patel's examination was thorough. Cognitive tests, memory assessments, neurological screenings. "Mr. Brooks," she said warmly when they finished, "you're sharper than patients half your age. I'll prepare a comprehensive report." The final piece was Detective Sarah Alvarez from the Elder Crimes Unit. Rebecca had worked with her before. Alvarez was a bulldog who'd built her career prosecuting financial exploitation and elder abuse. When Rebecca played her the recordings, Alvarez's expression turned to stone. "We've been looking for Clara Walsh for 3 years," Alvarez said quietly. "She disappeared after a case fell apart in Ohio. Witness died before trial. We always suspected she killed him." She looked at Henry with respect and determination. "Mr. Brooks, you've just handed us the break we needed. But we have to be very careful. Walsh is dangerous and she's connected. We do this wrong, she runs and we'll never find her." "I'm not letting her run," Henry said, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "I'm not letting her kill anyone else. And I'm not going to let my son destroy his life." Alvarez nodded. "Then we do this right. We do this smart. And we make sure she never hurts another family." As Henry left Rebecca's office that evening, he felt something shift inside him. The hurt was still there. The betrayal still burned, but alongside it was something else. Purpose. His Eleanor would have called it righteous anger. Whatever it was, it steadied his hands and cleared his mind. He had 48 hours before Clara's timeline. 48 hours to turn his home into a trap. The hunter had become the hunted, but Clara Walsh didn't know it yet. She was about to learn that underestimating a 65-year-old electrician was a fatal mistake. Henry sat in his darkened living room at 2 a.m., headphones on, listening to the audio feed from the micro-recorder he'd planted in Daniel's car 3 days ago. Detective Alvarez had approved the placement. Daniel was now officially under surveillance as part of a criminal conspiracy. What Henry heard made his blood run cold. "Yeah, Vinny, Sunday morning. Early. The old man's routine is predictable." Clara's voice was casual, like she was ordering takeout. "Daniel gets him down to the basement. I make sure he takes his morning medication first. 30 minutes after ingestion, coordination goes to hell. 1 push on the stairs, maybe 2. Natural fall, head trauma done." A male voice responded, gravelly and professional. "And the kid?" "Daniel holding up. Daniel's weak but manageable. I've got him by the balls, literally and financially. 50 grand in gambling debt, affair documented, everything. He tries to back out, his life implodes anyway. He'll do it." "What about cleanup?" "The house. That's where you come in. I need the usual scene staging, evidence management, witness control if anyone gets nosy. The neighbor, Mrs. Chun, she's already suspicious. Might need handling." Henry's hands clenched into fists. Mrs. Chun was 73, a widow who brought him soup when he was sick. Clara was casually discussing her murder like it was a household chore. Vinny's response was chillingly pragmatic. "Handling costs extra. 10 grand for peripheral cleanup. And I want half up front this time, Jess. That Ohio job left me exposed." "The Ohio job fell apart because your guy panicked," Clara snapped. "I cleaned up your mess. But fine. 50,000 total, half now, half when the insurance pays out. Henry's policy is 300 grand. Plenty to go around." "And the kids cut?" Clara laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. "Daniel thinks he's getting 100,000 to clear his debts and start fresh. What he's actually getting is a one-way trip to being the prime suspect if anything goes wrong. He's the grieving son who discovered the body, who'll crack under pressure. If we need a fall guy, he's already in position." Henry ripped off the headphones, his stomach churning. Clara wasn't just planning to kill him. She was setting up Daniel to take the fall. His son, for all his weakness and terrible choices, was being played just as much as Henry had been. Detective Alvarez arrived at Henry's house before dawn, accompanied by 2 agents from the FBI's white-collar crimes division. Leonardo Vinny Castellano, it turned out, was more than just a fixer. He was the linchpin of an interstate operation specializing in elder fraud, identity theft, and murder for insurance money. "We've had Castellano on our radar for 5 years," Agent Torres explained, spreading a web of connections across Henry's dining table. "But he's careful, uses cutouts, burns phones, never directly involved in the violence. Your daughter-in-law is one of his most prolific operators." The evidence was staggering. Castellano's network spanned 6 states, with at least 15 suspicious deaths connected to insurance fraud. Clara Walsh was just one of several specialist contractors who infiltrated families, built trust, and executed what Castellano called natural transitions. "Each death is carefully staged," Agent Martinez added. "Falls, medication errors, carbon monoxide accidents. Always in the victim's home. Always when they're isolated. The families are devastated, the insurance companies pay out, and Castellano's network gets richer." Alvarez pointed to a flowchart showing Walsh's known activities. Harold Peterson, age 70, fell down his basement stairs, just like she's planning for you. Dorothy Mitchell, 68, died from a medication overdose ruled accidental. Bernard Hughes, 72, carbon monoxide poisoning from a faulty heater. Same MO every time. Walsh enters their lives through a romantic relationship or family connection, gains trust and access, then strikes when she has financial control. "And the accomplices?" Henry asked, his voice hoarse. "Usually desperate men with debt or addiction problems. Walsh specializes in finding vulnerable people she can manipulate. The pattern is consistent. She seduces them, compromises them, then uses them until they're no longer useful." Alvarez's expression softened slightly. "Your son fits the profile perfectly. Gambling debts, failing business, vulnerable after his mother's death. Walsh identified him as an access point to you." Henry felt his anger crystallizing into something harder, more focused. "So we take them all down. Walsh, Castellano, the whole network." "That's exactly what we're going to do," Torres confirmed. "But we need Walsh and Daniel to make their move. We need them caught in the act with irrefutable evidence. Your house becomes our trap." Over the next 18 hours, Henry's home transformed into a high-tech surveillance operation. Micro cameras were installed in every room, invisible to casual observation. Audio equipment capable of capturing whispered conversations. Henry's workshop, the intended murder scene, received special attention. Cameras hidden in tool racks, in the ceiling fixtures, even in the electrical panel itself. "Ironic," Henry muttered to Alvarez as they watched technicians work. "They chose to kill me in my workshop because they thought I'd be comfortable there, unsuspecting. But this room is my domain. I know every inch of it." Alvarez smiled grimly. "That's exactly why we'll catch them. They're walking into your world, playing by your rules. They just don't know it yet." As night fell, Henry made backup copies of everything, every recording, every piece of evidence, every detail of Castellano's network. He encrypted the files and distributed them to Rebecca, Alvarez, and a safety deposit box at 3 different banks. If something happened to him, if Walsh's plan somehow succeeded, the evidence would still surface. He stood in his workshop as the sun set, surrounded by the tools he'd collected over 40 years. Tools that had built this house, raised his family, created his life with Eleanor. Tomorrow they would witness either his murder or his triumph. Sunday morning was 12 hours away. Henry Brooks was ready. Friday evening. Henry moved through his house with purpose, each action deliberate and controlled. The FBI technicians had left hours ago, their work invisible to untrained eyes. But Henry saw everything: the microcamera disguised as a smoke detector housing, the audio receiver hidden inside the antique clock Eleanor had loved, the panic button installed under the workshop table within easy reach. Detective Alvarez had called it controlled environment entrapment. Henry called it survival. He started in the basement, the killing floor Clara had chosen. The stairs descended 15 steps into his workshop, walls lined with tools accumulated over 4 decades. A veteran electrician's arsenal. Wire strippers, voltage testers, soldering equipment, power tools. The workspace where he built his children's toys, repaired neighbors' appliances, and lost himself after Eleanor died. Clara had chosen well. The stairs were steep, the concrete floor unforgiving. A fall from the top would be devastating, possibly fatal, for a man his age. The medical examiner would see exactly what Clara intended. An elderly man dizzy from medication, losing his balance. A tragic accident. Henry ran his hand along the stair railing he'd installed 30 years ago. Solid oak, worn smooth by thousands of trips up and down. He'd gripped this railing coming up from the workshop after Eleanor's funeral, legs weak, tears blinding him. Now Clara planned to make it the instrument of his death. "Not today," he whispered. "Not ever." He'd reinforced the workshop with 5 additional cameras, each covering different angles. No blind spots. Every word spoken, every action taken, would be captured in high definition from multiple perspectives. Agent Torres had been impressed with Henry's suggestions. The old electrician understood sightlines and lighting better than their technical team. The panic button under the work table was connected directly to Alvarez's tactical team, positioned in 3 unmarked vehicles within 90 seconds of the house. Press it once, officers approach. Press it twice, immediate breach and rescue. Henry had tested it 17 times that afternoon until the motion became muscle memory. Saturday morning brought unexpected clarity. Henry woke at dawn feeling centered, almost calm. He made coffee in Eleanor's favorite pot, scrambled eggs the way she taught him, and sat at their kitchen table watching the sunrise. This house held 40 years of memories. First steps, birthday parties, quiet dinners, Eleanor's laugh echoing through the rooms. Clara thought she could take that from him. Thought she could reduce his life to a police report and an insurance payout. Henry's phone buzzed. "Rebecca, medical documentation filed with county clerk. Your competency is legally established. Financial power of attorney revoked from Daniel as of 8 a.m. this morning. Assets frozen and protected. She can't touch anything." Another text from Alvarez. Tactical team rehearsed entry protocols. 8 officers for entry points, 18-second breach time. "We'll be ready." A third message from Dr. Patel. Cognitive assessment officially filed. "You're sharper than most 40-year-olds, Henry. Stay safe." People he'd known for weeks were fighting for him. Meanwhile, the son he'd raised for 33 years was planning his murder. Henry spent Saturday afternoon in deliberate normalcy. He mowed the lawn, waved to Mrs. Chun across the fence, picked up groceries. To anyone watching, and Clara likely was, he seemed like just another elderly man puttering through his weekend routine. But every action was calculated. The lawn mowing ensured no overgrown grass would impede the tactical team's approach. The grocery trip created a witness timeline. The chat with Mrs. Chun established his normal, non-impaired behavior hours before the planned murder. "Playing chess while they think I'm playing checkers," Eleanor would have said. She'd loved strategy games, especially the way patience and planning could defeat seemingly superior forces. As evening fell, Henry returned to the workshop one final time. He tested every camera angle, verified every audio feed, confirmed every backup system. Then he did something that surprised even himself. He prayed. Henry hadn't prayed much since Eleanor died. Faith had seemed distant, God's attention elsewhere. But tonight, kneeling in the workshop where he'd built a life, he found words coming. "I don't ask you to strike them down. I ask for strength to face them, for wisdom to see this through, and for my son, somehow to find his way back from this darkness." His phone rang. Daniel's name on the screen. "Hey, Dad." Daniel's voice sounded strained, tired. "Just wanted to confirm tomorrow. We'll be there around 9 a.m.? Clara wants to show you those insurance papers." Henry closed his eyes, memorizing his son's voice. After tomorrow, nothing would be the same. 9 o'clock works fine, son. I'll have coffee ready. Dad, Daniel trailed off. In the background, Henry heard Clara's sharp whisper. "Just confirm and hang up. See you tomorrow," Daniel finished hollowly. After he disconnected, Henry sat in the silence of his workshop. Alvarez's team was positioned. Rebecca had the legal framework in place. Dr. Patel had documented his sound mind. The evidence was secured and distributed. Every piece was positioned. The trap was set. Henry thought about the person he'd been 6 days ago. A lonely widower, grieving and isolated, trusting his family implicitly. That Henry was gone. The man who would face tomorrow had been forged by betrayal, tempered by evidence of evil, and sharpened by the absolute necessity of survival. Clara Walsh had made a critical miscalculation. She'd seen a 65-year-old man and assumed weakness. She'd seen grief and assumed vulnerability. She'd seen age and assumed she'd already won. But Henry Brooks had spent 40 years working with electricity, understanding how systems connect, how circuits complete, how one wrong move could be fatal. Tomorrow, Clara would learn that some circuits, once triggered, can't be stopped. He climbed the basement stairs one last time before Sunday, hand trailing along the oak railing. Tomorrow, these stairs would be the stage for Clara's final performance. But the script had been rewritten without her knowledge. The hunter was walking into a trap she couldn't see. Henry was ready. Saturday evening, 6 p.m. Henry heard Daniel's car pull into the driveway. 12 hours before the planned murder. The weekly dinner ritual, one final performance before Clara's endgame. Henry stood at his kitchen window, watching his son and daughter-in-law approach, and felt a surreal disconnect. They looked so normal. Daniel carried a bottle of wine. Clara held a casserole dish. A typical family dinner. Except one of them was a serial killer, and the other had agreed to murder his own father. Henry opened the door with a practiced smile. Right on time. Come in, come in. Clara's kiss on his cheek felt like ice. Hi, Dad. How are you feeling? Her eyes scanned the room, lingering on the security camera in the corner, still showing its disconnected red light, exactly as Henry had left it. He'd disabled the indicator while keeping the camera fully functional. Clara visibly relaxed seeing the dead light. Feeling good, Henry replied, channeling every ounce of his electrician's poker face from decades of hiding bad news from anxious homeowners. Though I've been a bit forgetful lately. Can't remember if I took my medications this morning. Clara's eyes lit up, a predator sensing weakness. Oh, that's concerning. Have you been keeping track? Maybe we should set up a pill organizer. That might help, Henry agreed, playing the part Rebecca and Alvarez had coached him on. Project Minor Confusion. Give her confidence. Let her think the plan is working. Daniel barely made eye contact, focusing instead on setting the table with mechanical precision. His hands trembled slightly as he arranged the silverware. Henry wanted to grab his son, shake him, demand to know how it had come to this. Instead, he played his role. Dinner was surreal. Henry had prepared Eleanor's pot roast recipe, the one he'd made hundreds of times, the one that had fed countless family gatherings. The irony wasn't lost on him. Sharing a meal with people planning to kill him, using his dead wife's recipe. This is delicious, Dad, Daniel said quietly, just like Mom used to make. Your mother taught me everything about cooking, Henry replied, watching his son's face. For a moment he saw guilt there, real genuine remorse. But then Clara's hand covered Daniel's on the table, and the moment passed. Actually, Henry, Clara said, pulling out a folder from her purse, we wanted to talk to you about some paperwork. Just routine insurance stuff, but it really should be handled soon. Henry put on his reading glasses, hands deliberately shaking slightly as he opened the folder. The documents were professionally forged. He'd know Rebecca had already reviewed identical copies. Life insurance beneficiary changes, power of attorney transfers, even a new will. All designed to give Clara complete control of his assets the moment he died. This seems complicated, Henry said, injecting uncertainty into his voice. All these legal terms. Maybe I should have a lawyer look at it. It's really standard, Clara assured him, her smile predatory. Just protecting your assets, making sure Daniel is taken care of. After all, he's your son. Your only family. The words stung because they'd once been true. Daniel had been his whole world after Eleanor died. His son, his legacy, his hope for the future. Now that son sat silently, letting his wife manipulate a murder. I suppose you're right, Henry said slowly, not signing anything. Let me sleep on it. My head feels fuzzy tonight. Maybe tomorrow morning we can go over it again. Tomorrow morning would be perfect, Clara agreed, satisfaction dripping from every word. Why don't we come by early? Say 9 a.m.? We can review everything when you're fresh. 9 o'clock, Henry confirmed, sealing the appointment for his own murder. After dinner, as Clara cleared dishes, She excused herself to use the bathroom. Henry knew Alvarez's team was monitoring every room. He heard her footsteps climb the stairs, past the guest bathroom, and continue to the master bedroom. Through his hidden earpiece, Alvarez's voice. She's checking the bedroom cameras, taking photos of the layout, scouting the territory, planning the aftermath. Clara was nothing if not thorough. When she returned, Henry pretended not to notice the satisfied smile on her face. Daniel sat hunched in the living room, finishing his wine with mechanical gulps. Liquid courage for tomorrow's horror. "Daniel," Henry said quietly, giving his son one final chance. "Is everything okay? You seem stressed." For a heartbeat, Daniel's mask cracked. His eyes met Henry's, and in them, Henry saw a drowning man. "Dad, he started, then stopped as Clara's hand landed on his shoulder. "He's just tired," Clara interrupted smoothly. "Business has been stressful, but things are going to get better soon. Right, honey?" "Right," Daniel whispered, and Henry watched his son choose evil over courage one more time. As they prepared to leave, Clara hugged Henry again. "We'll see you bright and early tomorrow. Don't forget to take your evening medications." "I won't forget," Henry promised. The medication she'd carefully adjusted over the past month, increasing the dosage, adding new pills, creating the perfect pharmaceutical cocktail to ensure dizziness and impaired coordination. Tomorrow morning, she'd give him a special dose, waiting 30 minutes for it to take effect before Daniel lured him to the basement stairs. But tomorrow morning, Henry would palm the pills, spit them out, and pretend to be impaired while completely in control. After their car disappeared down the street, Henry sagged against the closed door. Alvarez's voice crackled through his earpiece. "You did great. The performance was perfect. She's completely convinced." "Performing for my life," Henry muttered. He returned to the kitchen and discovered something on the counter. Clara had left the casserole dish. Deliberately, he realized. An excuse to return tomorrow, to have a reason for being there beyond the insurance meeting. Every detail planned, every contingency covered. Henry's phone buzzed with a new message. Unknown number. His blood ran cold as he read. Old man settled. Sunday morning is a go. Usual rate plus hazard pay. The kid better not lose his nerve. They'd somehow gotten his number. Castellano's network was sending confirmation directly to him. A message meant for Clara that had been misrouted. Henry immediately forwarded it to Alvarez. Her response came within seconds. "They're sloppy. Getting overconfident. That message just gave us Castellano's phone number. We're tracing it now." At 11 p.m., Henry received one more call. Rebecca, her voice tight with controlled anger. "Henry, I just received the coroner's report on Harold Peterson, the man Clara killed in Michigan 2 years ago. And the fall wasn't what killed him. Toxicology showed a massive overdose of blood pressure medication in his system, enough to cause vertigo and impaired judgment. The same medications Clara has been adjusting for you. The fall was staged, but she murdered him with an overdose first." Henry's grip tightened on the phone. "She's done this before. Perfected the method. Which means we have precedent. Premeditation across state lines. Henry, when we take her down tomorrow, we're putting her away forever." After midnight, Henry made his final preparations. He charged his phone fully, placed his medical alert pendant around his neck, modified by the FBI to include a GPS tracker and secondary panic button, and laid out his clothes for tomorrow. Blue work shirt, the one Eleanor had given him. Jeans worn soft with age. Steel-toed boots with good traction. If he was going to face his would-be killers, he'd do it dressed like the man he'd always been. A working man, a builder, a fighter. At 2 a.m., unable to sleep, Henry walked through his house one final time. Each room held memories. The living room where Daniel took his first steps. The kitchen where Eleanor taught their son to cook. The bedroom where he'd held his wife as she died. 40 years of life, of love, of family. Clara thought she could erase all of that with one push down a flight of stairs. She was wrong. Henry returned to the workshop, sat at his bench, and waited for dawn. The tools around him were familiar, comforting. He'd built a life with these hands. Tomorrow, he'd defend it with the same strength. At 6 a.m., his phone lit up with final messages. "Alvarez, Tactical team in position. We're ready. Rebecca. All legal protections active. She can't touch your assets. Agent Torres. Surveillance confirms Walsh made 3 calls to Castellano last night. She's confident. That's our advantage. Henry replied to each with a simple, I'm ready. At 8:55 a.m., Daniel's car appeared at the end of the street. The countdown was over. Henry Brooks stood in his kitchen, coffee pot brewing, and prepared to meet his killers. Sunday morning arrived with deceptive tranquility. Henry Brooks sat in his kitchen, hands wrapped around a coffee mug that had long gone cold. Through the window he watched the sunrise paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, colors Eleanor had always loved. She would have been devastated by what was about to unfold, but she also would have understood his resolve. At 9:47 a.m., Daniel's sedan pulled into the driveway. Henry's heart, which he'd kept steeled for days, betrayed him with a painful lurch. That was still his son walking up the path. The boy he'd taught to ride a bike, whose scraped knees he'd bandaged, whose graduation had filled him with such pride. But the man approaching his door was a stranger willing to murder for money. Clara emerged from the passenger side, her smile as bright and false as costume jewelry. She carried a small bag, probably containing the props for his staged accident. Henry had listened to enough of their planning to know they'd chosen his basement workshop, intending to make it look like he'd fallen from the stepladder while changing a light bulb. The irony wasn't lost on him. They'd chosen his domain, the place where he was most competent, most aware, most in control. A 40-year electrician doesn't make rookie mistakes with ladders and light fixtures. But they'd counted on police investigating an elderly man's death with minimal scrutiny. Henry opened the door before they could knock. Right on time, he said, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. Hey, Dad, Daniel managed, unable to meet his eyes. The guilt was written across his face in lines of tension and sleeplessness. Clara, by contrast, was all warmth and false concern. Henry, we thought we'd help you with those basement lights you mentioned, she said smoothly. Daniel brought his tools. Did he now? Henry stepped aside, letting them enter. Actually, before we head downstairs, there's something I need to show you both. In the living room. He watched Clara's micro-expression. A flicker of annoyance quickly masked. She'd wanted to move directly to the kill zone to maintain momentum and control. But she nodded, following him with Daniel trailing behind like a condemned man walking to the gallows. Henry picked up the tablet from his coffee table, his hands remarkably steady. 65 years of life had taught him that true strength wasn't the absence of fear, but the mastery of it. I fixed the security cameras, he said simply, and pressed play. Clara's voice filled the room, cold and clinical as she detailed the plan. The old man goes down hard. Head trauma, make it clean. I've done this before. Harold Peterson in Michigan, Dorothy Mitchell in Ohio. They ruled both accidental. The color drained from Clara's face. Daniel made a sound like a wounded animal, backing toward the door. There's more, Henry continued, advancing the footage. Here's where you discuss the insurance payout. And here. He paused on a frame of Clara on her phone. Here's where you coordinate with Leonardo Castellano about cleanup. Dad, Daniel's voice cracked. I didn't want. You didn't want to what, son? Henry's voice finally broke, emotion flooding through. Didn't want to murder your own father? But you were going to do it anyway? For what? Money. To cover your gambling debts. Clara's demeanor shifted instantly, the mask dropping to reveal the predator beneath. You stupid old man. You think recording us changes anything? Who's going to believe? The front door burst open. Detective Alvarez led the tactical team, weapons drawn, voices sharp with authority. Hands where we can see them. Clara Walsh, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, and outstanding warrants in 3 states. Clara lunged for her bag, but 2 officers had her on the ground before she moved 3 feet. Daniel simply collapsed, hands raised, tears streaming down his face as he was handcuffed. Henry watched his son being led away, and felt something inside him shatter that would never fully heal. He'd saved his own life, stopped a serial killer, protected other potential victims. But he'd also lost his son, his only child, his last living connection to Eleanor. Detective Alvarez placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Mr. Brooks, we need your statement. But first, are you all right?" Henry looked at the empty doorway where Daniel had disappeared. "No, detective," he said quietly. "I don't think I'll ever be all right again. But I'm alive. And that'll have to be enough." The courtroom on the 7th floor of the county courthouse had become Henry Brooks's second home over the following months. He'd sat through 18 days of preliminary hearings, countless depositions, and finally, the trials that would determine the fates of the two people who'd planned his murder. Clara Walsh's trial came first. The woman who'd called herself Clara Brooks sat at the defense table in an orange jumpsuit, her blonde hair pulled back severely. All traces of the warm daughter-in-law vanished. The prosecution, led by Assistant District Attorney Eleanor Chan, a coincidence of naming that wasn't lost on Henry, built their case with methodical precision. The evidence was overwhelming. Henry's recordings formed the backbone, but the investigation had unearthed so much more. Harold Peterson's death in Michigan, initially ruled accidental, was reopened. Dorothy Mitchell's case in Ohio followed. Forensic accountants traced Clara's financial trail across 6 states, revealing a pattern of targeting vulnerable elderly men, often through their adult children. Members of the jury, ADHN, addressed them during closing arguments. Clara Walsh is a predator who weaponized the most fundamental human bonds, family, trust, love, to commit murder for profit. She didn't just plan to kill Henry Brooks. She corrupted his son, exploited Daniel's weakness, and would have left that family destroyed while she moved on to her next victim. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. When they returned, the 4 women stood and delivered the verdicts on all counts. Guilty. Guilty of conspiracy to commit murder. Guilty of fraud. Guilty of elder abuse. The Michigan and Ohio cases would follow, but this verdict ensured Clara Walsh would spend the next 25 years to life behind bars. Henry felt no triumph as the judge delivered the sentence. Just a hollow exhaustion and the weight of what came next. Daniel's trial was far more complex, emotionally and legally. His defense attorney, a young public defender named Marcus Webb, argued that Daniel was himself a victim, manipulated by Walsh, drowning in gambling addiction, coerced by threats against his own life. "My client made terrible choices," Webb acknowledged in his opening statement. But he didn't initiate this conspiracy. He was targeted, groomed, and ultimately trapped by a serial killer who saw him as a tool. Henry sat through testimony about Daniel's gambling addiction, hearing for the first time the full extent of his son's debts. $127,000 lost over 18 months, not the $50,000 Clara had mentioned. He learned about the loan sharks who'd threatened Daniel, about Clara's promise that one job would solve everything. On the 4th day, Daniel took the stand. He looked 20 years older than his 38 years, his hair graying at the temples, his hands trembling as he was sworn in. "Mr. Brooks," Adichan began, "tell the court when you first discussed murdering your father." Daniel's voice was barely audible. "It was February. Clara, she'd been asking about my dad for weeks. His routine, his health, his finances. I thought she was just trying to be a good wife, showing interest in my family." He paused, swallowing hard. "Then she told me about Harold, her last husband's father. She said it so casually, like she was discussing a home improvement project. She'd staged it to look like an accident, collected insurance money, paid off Harold Jr.'s debts. And you didn't go to the police?" I was terrified. She showed me pictures, evidence she'd kept like trophies. She said if I refused to help or if I told anyone, she'd frame me for Harold's death. She had my fingerprints on things, she said. Photographs of me at Harold's house. She could make it look like I was her accomplice all along. Henry watched his son break down on the stand and felt the complicated weight of grief mixed with rage mixed with love. Daniel had been weak, had chosen wrong at every turn, had been willing to let his father die. But he was also still the boy Henry had raised, corrupted by a monster who'd systematically destroyed his judgment. The jury was out for 2 days. When they returned, the verdict was guilty on conspiracy charges but not premeditated murder. The distinction mattered. Judge Patricia Thornton sentenced Daniel to 12 years, with possibility of parole after 8 with good behavior and completion of addiction treatment programs. As bailiffs led Daniel away, he turned to look at his father for the first time since the arrests. His mouth formed 2 words. "I'm sorry." Henry nodded once. It wasn't forgiveness, he wasn't sure he had that in him yet. But it was acknowledgement. His son was alive, would have a chance at redemption, at rebuilding a life. It was more than Henry would have had if Clara's plan had succeeded. The dismantling of Leonardo Castellano's network became a federal case, spanning 7 states and involving over 30 individuals. Castellano himself was arrested at his New Jersey waste management business, a front for his various criminal enterprises. The FBI discovered he'd been running the elder abuse operation as one of several revenue streams, considering it low risk, high reward. Special Agent Torres, who led the federal investigation, visited Henry at his home 3 months after the initial arrests. "Your evidence broke it wide open," Torres explained, accepting a cup of coffee in the same kitchen where Henry had planned his defense. "We've identified at least 11 murders connected to this network over the past 7 years. Because you acted, we can bring closure to 11 families who thought their loved ones died accidentally." Henry thought of those families, of children who'd buried parents never knowing they'd been murdered. 11 people, he said quietly. She was going to make it 12. But she didn't, Torres said firmly. Because you were smarter, stronger, and more prepared than she anticipated. You saved your own life and stopped a serial killer. That matters, Mr. Brooks. As word spread through the community about what had happened, Henry found himself simultaneously isolated and celebrated. Some neighbors looked at him with pity, the old man nearly murdered by his own son. Others treated him like a hero, the survivor who'd outsmarted killers. Neither perspective felt quite right. What haunted him most were the quiet moments, alone in the house he'd shared with Eleanor, knowing that Daniel's empty bedroom upstairs would stay empty for over a decade. He'd saved his own life but lost his son anyway, just in a different way than Clara had planned. One evening, 6 months after the trials concluded, Henry sat in his workshop, the room that was supposed to be his death scene, and finally allowed himself to cry. He wept for the son he'd lost, for the innocence that had been stolen, for the family that would never be whole again. He cried until he had nothing left, until the grief transformed into something harder and more purposeful. He was alive. He'd survived. And he had a choice. Let this destroy him or use it to protect others. Henry Brooks chose to fight. 15 months after the confrontation that saved his life, Henry Brooks stood in the community center of Riverside Acres, addressing a room full of seniors who'd gathered for his Protecting Yourself, Security for Seniors workshop. He'd given this presentation 14 times now, refining it with each iteration, but the message remained constant. Predators, he told the assembled group, mistake age for weakness. They see gray hair and assume confusion. They see retirement and assume vulnerability. They're wrong. He clicked to the next slide, showing a simple home security setup, affordable cameras, motion sensors, basic precautions. Knowledge is protection. Awareness is survival. And community is strength. After the presentation, a woman named Dorothy Simmons approached him. She was 72, recently widowed, and her hands shook slightly as she spoke. Mr. Brooks, my daughter's new boyfriend has been asking about my house value, my life insurance. It's probably nothing, but after hearing your story, Henry spent 40 minutes with Dorothy, helping her document her concerns, providing contact information for Detective Alvarez and attorney Rebecca Sullivan. 2 weeks later, it turned out Dorothy's instincts were correct. Her daughter's boyfriend had a history of financial fraud targeting elderly victims. Because Dorothy acted early, no crime was committed, but a potential tragedy was prevented. These moments had become Henry's new purpose. He'd partnered with Detective Alvarez's Elder Crimes Unit, with Kate Sullivan's law firm, and with Dr. Elizabeth Patel from the medical evaluation that had protected his own legal standing. Together, they'd launched Silver Shield, a statewide initiative to protect seniors from financial exploitation, abuse, and violence. Henry's technical skills found new purpose installing security systems for elderly neighbors, often at cost or for free. Mrs. Patterson down the street, Mr. and Mrs. Yamamoto, the widow-chan, he'd secured all their homes, teaching them how to use the systems, empowering them with the tools to protect themselves. You've created quite a legacy, Rebecca Sullivan told him over lunch one autumn afternoon. They'd become genuine friends through the ordeal, her legal expertise and his practical wisdom forming an effective partnership. We've had 43 cases referred through Silver Shield, prevented at least 8 major financial frauds, and stopped 2 cases that showed signs of potential violence. It's not enough, Henry said, though he managed a small smile. There are thousands of seniors in this state alone, millions nationwide. People like Clara Walsh are still out there. But there are also people like you fighting back, Kate countered. That's the legacy, Henry. Not just the people you personally save, but the culture you're building. The awareness you're spreading. The ripple effects surprised even Henry. His story had been covered by local news, then picked up by national media. He'd been interviewed for a 60-minute segment on elder abuse. Support groups across the country requested his workshop materials. A documentary filmmaker wanted to tell his story. Through it all, Henry remained grounded in the practical work. Every Tuesday, he held office hours at the community center. Every Thursday, he did home security consultations. Every Saturday, he led a support group for seniors dealing with family betrayal, perhaps the most emotionally difficult work he did. In those support group meetings, held in a quiet room at the back of the community center, Henry finally found his own healing. Listening to others share their stories of children who'd stolen from them, partners who'd betrayed them, family members who'd exploited their trust, he realized he wasn't alone in his pain. The hardest part, said George Martinez, an 81-year-old veteran whose grandson had drained his accounts, is the guilt. Wondering what I did wrong, how I raised a child who could do this. Henry understood that guilt intimately. He still carried it, a weight that never fully lifted. We can't control the choices others make, he told the group, words he still struggled to believe himself. We can only control our own responses. We chose survival. We chose to protect ourselves and others. That's not selfishness. That's wisdom earned through pain. Daniel's first letter arrived 14 months into his sentence. Henry stared at the envelope for 3 days before opening it. The letter was short, written in his son's familiar handwriting. Dad, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I need you to know I think about you every day. About what I almost did. About what I became. The addiction counselor here says I need to own my choices. I can't blame everything on Clara or the gambling or the debts. I chose weakness over strength. I chose money over family. I chose to become someone who could plan his own father's murder. I'm working on myself. Therapy, addiction treatment, education programs. Not because I think it erases what I did, but because I don't want to be that person anymore. I understand if you never want to see me again. But I needed you to know I'm sorry. And I'm grateful you're alive. Daniel. Henry read the letter a dozen times, emotions warring within him. Part of him wanted to tear it up, to maintain the protective anger that had sustained him through the trials. But another part, the part that was still a father, recognized genuine remorse and the difficult work of redemption. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he took the letter to his support group, sharing it anonymously, asking for perspective. Forgiveness isn't for them, offered Claire Richardson, whose daughter had tried to have her declared incompetent to seize control of her assets. It's for us. It's releasing the poison of hatred, so we can live fully. But forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation, added George. You can forgive someone and still choose to keep them out of your life. Forgiveness is internal. Relationship is external. They're separate choices. After weeks of reflection, Henry wrote back. A single page, carefully considered. Daniel, I'm glad you're getting help. Addiction is a disease, and you're right to treat it seriously. I'm working toward forgiveness, but I'm not there yet. Maybe I'll never fully get there. That's something I'm learning to accept. What you need to understand is that even if I forgive you someday, I can never trust you the way I did before. You were willing to kill me. That knowledge doesn't go away. I hope you build a better life. I hope you find peace and purpose. But I need you to understand that my healing requires distance right now. Maybe that will change. Maybe it won't. I'm alive because I chose to protect myself. That choice doesn't end just because you're sorry. Dad, it wasn't reconciliation, but it was honest. Henry sent the letter and felt a small piece of the burden lift. As the seasons turned and the second anniversary of the confrontation approached, Henry stood in his backyard on a cool spring evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in Eleanor's favorite colors. The security cameras he'd installed captured every angle of his property, silent sentinels standing watch. He thought about Clara Walsh serving her sentence, about Leonardo Castellano facing federal charges, about Daniel working through his own demons in a correctional facility, about the 11 families who'd finally gotten answers about their loved ones' deaths. He thought about Dorothy Simmons and the Yamamotos and Mrs. Patterson, neighbors who slept safer because of his work, about the 43 cases Kate had mentioned, about the lives protected, the tragedies prevented. Most of all, he thought about Eleanor, and what she might say if she could see him now. She'd be heartbroken about Daniel, furious about Clara, but proud of how Henry had survived and transformed his trauma into purpose. "I'm still here, Maggie," he said quietly to the evening air. "Still fighting, still helping, still alive." A notification chimed on his phone. The security system he'd installed for a new client was online. Another home secured, another vulnerable person protected. Henry smiled, just a little, and headed inside to log the installation and prepare for tomorrow's workshop. The predators were still out there. They always would be. But now there was a network of aware, protected, empowered people standing against them. Henry Brooks had built that network from the ashes of his family's betrayal, had transformed his near death into a legacy of life. He was 67 years old now, a grandfather without grandchildren, a father with a son in prison, a widower living alone in a house full of memories and security cameras. By any measure, tragedy had marked his life indelibly. But he was also a survivor, an advocate, a protector, a teacher. He'd turned his greatest vulnerability into his greatest strength, and every day he woke up, every senior he helped protect, every system he installed, was a victory against those who thought they could prey on age and trust. Henry Brooks had been hunted by predators who saw only an easy target. They'd been wrong, and he'd spend the rest of his days making sure others knew they didn't have to be victims either. The cameras watched over his home, the community he'd built surrounded him with purpose, and somewhere in the future, uncertain but possible, waited the hope of genuine healing. For now, survival and purpose were enough. They had to be. And in a world where predators thrived on silence and shame, Henry's voice rang clear. Fight back. Protect yourself. You're stronger than they think. That was his legacy, and it was just beginning.